Surprises. Not sure how much you like a surprise? If you were ever to take a group of kids on some kind of an excursion or trip, a gang of kids, you really want to be ready for surprises. You have to be somebody who can go with the flow, as it were. You need to be able to adapt quickly, like instantaneously, to all kinds of strange and weird things. Some cases in point for me were back in I think I was in grade 10 in high school, and that year at the Haliburton High School, they incorporated or started an outdoors club. So it was an outdoors club, a club where the direction or the aim was to take us on things like canoe trips. So that first year, the guy heading it up was a guy named Wes Werbowie, and he taught way up in the northern parts of Ontario, and so he thought he knew what he was getting into. I'm not sure he knew what he was getting into. No, I'm sure he did. So there were a few surprises for him. I remember, for instance, this was a 5-day, so he decided on a 5-day canoe trip, 4 nights, 5 days, going up in through the Haliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve, starting at Redstone Lake and finishing at Redstone Lake. And so off we went. Peggy was with me on this journey. And I forget, there were a lot of kids, and 20 kids and a couple of adults. Werbowie and his wife, I think that was it. His new wife. So the first night, for instance, I remember we were supposed to camp. We had a special campground, a tent, places we were supposed to pitch our tents. And some of us, more precocious ones, noticed that there's a hunting camp right here. I think we'll just sleep in the hunting camp. So we did. I'm not sure he was prepared for that, but he kind of went with the flow and kind of allowed it. And right or for wrong, for better or for worse, I was one of those sleeping in that hunting camp, so I know that this happened. So that's the kind of thing he had to. What do I do now? A couple of days later, he decided that we'd have a day where we fended for ourselves. We found our own supper in the wild. Not sure, we didn't really have any training for that, so. So a couple of guys, they clubbed a groundhog to death, put it on a spit, and they roasted that baby for like hours. It was pretty. Remember the rubber chicken from last week? This was a similar. So I don't think that's quite what he had in mind. I think it was more maybe fish or something. The last day of the trip, coming across Big Redstone Lake, I was in the canoe sterning. Peggy was in the middle, and there's another guy, Bill Sheffy, who actually was in the front. I don't know if some of you know Bill Sheffy. And I managed to tip that canoe right in the middle of the lake. And all the people, and full of packs and people, and I'm sure that wasn't something that he was really calculating on. A little surprise there for the last day. So then but he knew what to do, and he was ready. He had three or four canoes he brought alongside each other and pulled us up, dried us out, put us back in, and off we went. I've had a little bit similar kind of experience, these mission trips that we took with teens a few years ago. So for instance, we went to Mexico back in 2007, I think it was, and just a lot of things happened that you really didn't bargain on, and you have to go with the flow. The culture shock thing, for instance, one of the things that just kind of, you don't know how to deal with this. We went to visit this little old lady who made her own tortillas from scratch. Like she took the corn, she ground the corn, then she baked it on this outdoor fire. Her little house there was like a tin shack. You could see through, you could blow through, nothing to it, dirt poor. And you don't know how to, and she fed us all lunch that day with her tortillas. And it was an awesome meal. So what do? On the way home, we had I think a dozen kids with us, and one of the boys, the airline, we got to Atlanta, and the airline had overbooked. They had a bit of a kerschnazzle. And they were going to leave one of our boys in Atlanta. Well, they flew the rest of us to Toronto. He was supposed to catch up later. And I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah, I didn't sort of envision myself getting to Toronto and saying, oh, yeah, we left Billy back in Atlanta, but he's coming later. It's all good. So you never know what you're going to. We actually argued the point. I argued the point, and he got to come with us, but someone else took his place, an adult from our trip. But that's the kind of thing that happens. Now, you see, Jesus Christ, he is the master of go with the flow. He is the best of the best. And this story, I think, is one of the classic cases of surprise after surprise after surprise. And he's got his kids with him. He's got his gang with him, his kids. his disciples. And they are, they're there. It says, they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes. So they're with him, but nothing is said about them at all. So one gets almost the impression that they're kind of like standing in a clump, watching, and totally freaked out. Eyes goggled out and mouths hanging open, like, oh? But that's just me. That's what I think. So you've probably heard this story before, so you got to watch that when you've heard stories before, because you kind of doze off when you listen to these stories. But seek to look at it with some fresh eyes today, and I want to try to help you with that, just to see what it was really like when this really happened, and what that would have looked like. And there were a lot of surprises. Well, for starters, Jesus has this idea. He says, let's go across the lake and do some kind of ministry mission across the lake. Well, they're in Galilee, which is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. The other side of the lake, where they're heading, kind of the southeast side, is Gentile country. So Jesus says, let's go over there and meet these people and do some stuff with them. I'm guessing that's one of the reasons we hear nothing from these disciples. They're terrified. To them, Gentiles, you don't go near them, you don't talk to them, you don't touch them, you don't deal with them. They're unclean. So they just don't get this. So Jesus, they arrive on the shore of this place. The people are called the Gerasenes in this text. And sometimes it's Gadarenes. Different versions and different gospels have different names for them. But you know what you'd like, what would be nice when you step out of the boat and you go to, with your entourage, and you go to a special place, is maybe that somebody might come and greet you, welcome you. And that is exactly what happens. Jesus has a little welcoming committee. It's a guy who is demon possessed, and he is one wild character, okay? So he's loud, he shouts and screams all the time. He's buck naked. And he lives in a cemetery. He runs and spends all his time in the tombs. So here's a guy who is he is totally unfit for community living. He just lives apart from everybody else. He has no social skills at this point whatsoever. And he's the guy that comes to greet Jesus, yelling and screaming. When he sees Jesus, it says he falls down. He cried out and fell at his feet. So he's kind of groveling. It's not like he's worshiping Jesus. He's kind of groveling there and kind of sycophantic. And he says, what do you want with me? So that's Jesus' welcome. Welcome to the town of the Gadarenes, or the Gerasenes. So he's got this kind of surprise welcome. Now, when the guy starts to speak, there are more surprises. Weird stuff. He says, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me. So there's this really weird mixture of the guy seems to know stuff. And by the guy, it's not really the guy. We're to understand here that this is the demon speaking through the man. Okay? Now, I'm not even going to get into whether you think demons are real, demons aren't real, whether they're mythology, whether they used to be, whether they aren't anymore. I've done that before. The Bible just assumes that they are, and so I'm going to do the same. So this demon speaks through this guy and says, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me. So, he's got some stuff right and he's got some stuff wrong. First of all, he says, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Dead on. How does he know this? There's a lot of questions. You read this, you come up with a lot of questions and not so many answers. How does he know this? We can only surmise that perhaps in the spiritual realm, or for a spiritual being that's infested this guy, that these things are apparent. There's something about Jesus that the spiritual can see. So he's right about this. He's dead on. Even the apostles, the disciples barely got this yet. It takes them the whole 3 years to kind of catch on to this, pretty much. But this guy sees it right off. But he says, what do you want with me? It's like he's very defensive. He's very belligerent, which is a misread of Jesus. Because, nobody really has to be belligerent or defensive with Jesus, as you know. He accepts us as we are. And then he says, I beg you, don't torture me. So he's very loudly, very publicly, just on the first encounter, as the guy reaches the shore of this town where he hasn't been before, he's getting described in ways that he isn't. So he's getting introduced as someone who might torture. You know, Jesus is going to torture people? It's not the Jesus I read about. Well, you ever notice how Jesus doesn't usually go around torturing, does he? Like he heals the sick, he cleanses the lepers, he brings sight to the blind, he gives hearing to the deaf, he raises the dead. You know, he comforts those who are who are grieving, and so on. That's Jesus. Torture? He's being totally misrepresented, which is classic of the evil one, and classic of what our culture and our world thinks of God. It's infested with these false and negative ideas of who God is. If there's a God, why does he ever allow anybody to get sick or, you know, bad things to happen? And so there's this whole mentality in our world that if there's a God, he's not much of a God, really. And there's this kind of negative aspersions on the character of God that are very much out there. And they're wrong. They're wrong. So but this is, and we even struggle with those ourselves. Here it's represented to us as straight from the evil one. Don't torture me. So he's misrepresented and he's represented at the same time. Now, weirdly, Jesus is having a little bit of difficulty with him because we're told that Jesus had commanded the evil spirit to come out of the man. So already at some point in this interchange, he's told this evil spirit to get out of this guy. And he didn't go. Well, there's a surprise. Because if you're reading through the Gospels, you'll see that every time that happens, Jesus says, leave him, they just leave. And there's several occasions already, and we're only in chapter 8 of Luke, where Jesus has cast out demons out of people. So there's some difficulty in this happening, which is a surprise. But then it's explained to us, sort of. It says many times that Jesus had commanded the evil spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. So the story really is that this is a very powerful demon of some kind. It's so powerful that when people chain the guy up and probably put shackles and chains on him and you know, bolt them in somewhere and put a guard on him, he just breaks loose and away goes. It's like extra superhuman strength going on here. So there's something pretty powerful going on, and Jesus is going to have to adapt to that. So it's a surprise. Now I think that there's a tell in this, something about what real freedom is, because you'll notice that this demon-possessed guy is totally free from all the strictures of human civilization. He doesn't answer to anybody, does he? He does whatever he wants. And there's kind of that out there in our world too. That if you know, that all the constraints of community living and of culture, that we have to behave in certain ways. And there are many who have kind of thrown those things aside just to be free. And you can be all kinds of free like that and not really free. This guy was in total bondage inside. So you can be so-called free outwardly and be totally bound up inwardly. I think that's an interesting point here. So what Jesus does is he asks the guy a question. He says, "What is your name?" That's the only thing he actually says to the demon, and that's surprising. Why is Jesus talking to demons? Don't you ever wonder that? That's just really weird. So he has and now they have a little conversation, a little back and forth. He says, "What is your name?" And the guy says, "Legion." Now, Legion, as you know, is the name for kind of an army, a Roman army. So that was basically a grouping of about 3,000 to 6,000 men in a Roman in a group of the Roman army, a Roman legion. A lot of people. And interestingly, when Jesus was being arrested before he was crucified the night before, his disciples are saying, "Should we fight? Should we fight and protect you, Lord?" They had a couple of swords. Peter actually cut off the ear of one guy. And Jesus says, "Put down your swords. Do you not know that I could call at any second here and get 12 legions of angels from my Father?" Just like that. That'd be a lot of angels. 12 times 3 to 6,000 angels. So Jesus said, you know, I could just like that. I could have angels come here and protect me and take me out of this mess. No worries. Which tells us that, you know, this is something Jesus submitted himself to, the crucifixion. That he could have got out of it at any time. But he willed himself in obedience to his Father to go to the cross for you and for me. Which I think is pretty incredible. He had the power. He says, I have the power to lay my life down and the power to take it up again. So in this case, the legion is probably just a whole lot. We're not told how many. But that's a surprise too, you see, because up to this point, the text always has the demon in singular. So you're supposed to be thinking there's a demon, there's a whole bunch of demons. How's that work? How many can you stuff in one person? Who knows? So this is a surprise. There's a huge number, a big number of them. And they have a conversation. It says, they begged him repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. And Jesus lets it. So this goes on for a while, because to do something repeatedly means it takes a little time. So over a few minutes or so, these demons inside this guy are saying to Jesus, please, 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 don't send us into the abyss, whatever the abyss is. This is the only mention of the word abyss in the Gospel of Luke. And it's a bit of a mystery as to what that is, but clearly it's some kind of place where you might send a demon and that it wouldn't be happy being there. It would be kind of held in chains or something and kept out of trouble. And they're begging Jesus so that they won't go there. And it sounds like he's kind of listening, which to me, again, why is he doing that? And then the story switches a bit in verse 32. It says, there's a large herd of pigs feeding there in the hillside, which is another clue that we're in Gentile country, because as you recall, Jews, if you're a kosher Jew, you never eat any pork whatsoever, right? Which is tough, because I don't know about you. I like my bacon, my ham, my pork chops, my tenderloin, my spare ribs. So I couldn't handle the whole Orthodox kosher Jew thing. And so if you keep kosher, none of those things. And in Jesus' day, everybody kept kosher, basically. The Jews, nothing to do with this sort of thing. So there's a whole herd of pigs, because this is Gentile country, grazing or whatever they're doing on the hillside, feeding there on the hillside. And the demons, the conversation goes on. They beg, again they're begging, they're groveling and begging. They beg Jesus to let them go into the pigs. And, it doesn't tell us what he said. It says he gave them permission. So I kind of envision Jesus like, what will they think of next? Kind of think, okay, way you go. And I'm sure he had wisdom in what he was doing. But so these demons go in these pigs, and it says the whole herd of them rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. So there's a lot of available pork right at this. It's kind of like roadkill, though. So, how many were there? Maybe 100 or more. Like, what a mess! What a weird situation. I mean, a day in the life. So now, and there were pig herders. Those who were tending the pigs saw what had happened. They ran off and reported this in the town and countryside. Now, I was just reading this in Lachlan, and it suddenly struck me what a parallel. Do you ever remember earlier in the Gospel of Luke, there were some herders of animals who got surprised by things? And there were shepherds in the fields watching over the flocks, sheep, by night. And they were sore afraid. And then after what happened, so they became witnesses to the angels and to the birth of Jesus, and then it says they ran off everywhere telling people what had happened. Here's Gentiles, the Gentile equivalent. It's the middle of the day, it's not the middle of the night, and they're tending their pigs on the hill, and they had this experience. And it says they ran off and told everybody what was going on. I just find that curious. That's the kind of thing I get a kick out of. Maybe I'm weird, right? So off he went. Off the people went to tell people about pigs. Now a lot has been said in the commentaries. I heard this at theological school. Like, think about the economics of this. Right? Now, this is a fairly major source of livelihood for a bunch of people in this town and area, because a lot of pigs is actually a lot of money. And now they're gone. So how do we rationalize, how do we figure that out? And I really don't know the answer to that. We'll come back to that maybe. But Jesus is doing something, he's got this figure. So now the scene shifts back to the guy who, you remember when he greeted Jesus, was screaming, and he was buck naked, and he was a big mess. Now it says he's in his right mind. He's totally sane. He's totally back to normal. And he's got his clothes on, which is kind of nice to hear. And he's sitting at Jesus' feet. He's sitting at Jesus' feet. Now, in those days, that expression, to sit at someone's feet, usually meant you would become their pupil. He'd be sitting there actually listening and submitting to the teachings of Jesus. He'd become a pupil of Jesus. So while all this is going on in the background, pigs are dying, people are running off, Jesus is having a little teaching session with the locals and this new guy who's now in his right mind. And all that's going on, we hear nothing about that, because the big story here is the background, like the whole pig thing and the demons. So he's dressed and in his right mind. So then the people all start to gather around to see this thing that has come to pass. And you'd think maybe that their response there would be, they're really ticked off with this guy, you know? He's destroyed a whole lot of pigs. But that's not their response. The response is, again, surprisingly, fear. Maybe not so surprisingly. It says they saw this guy, the guy that had been the scourge of the town and the whole area, a really weird guy who was very uncomfortable to even have him around. It says they were afraid. And the more they heard about it, it says, so that's their reaction, fear. So now you'd think they might be really surprised and grateful and impressed by Jesus, wouldn't you? Again, that's what you might think. That they'd say, wow, this guy's amazing. He cured a guy who's been possessed by powerful demons for years here. And, wow, we should find out what he's all about. No. They say, we'd like you to leave town now, please. I don't know, it doesn't say they said please. It just says, please leave the town. And it says, because they were overcome with fear. Interesting. So, now you'd think maybe Jesus, after he'd done all this for them, he might be a little bit offended, he might be a little bit hurt, he might be a little indignant, and might say, no, I'm going to stay here and do what I came to do. But he doesn't do that, does he? So it says, Jesus, he got into the boat and he left. Just like that. Please leave, and he's gone. Which I think is very telling of the ways of Jesus and the ways of God. And the way of Jesus is just like that. If you ask him in, he will come in. If you invite him into your life and into the various parts of your life, he will be delighted to participate. But if you don't want him, he will not stay. So watch that. Watch that, because he is that sensitive. God is sensitive, way more sensitive than any of the rest of us are. And when he is not wanted, he backs off. There's a great line, and I've repeated this a few zillion times, 1 Corinthians 13. Love does not insist on its own way. Now, God is love, so God never, ever insists on his own way with us, with his relationship with us. He wins us. He doesn't insist on his own way. I always highlight this when I'm talking to marrying couples. You know, the couple there. So let's read this at your wedding service. And this is a definition of love from the Bible perspective. And look at this line. Love does not, I had this yesterday actually, I had a couple in here yesterday. Love does not insist on his own way. And the guy immediately says to the guy, hey, you hear that? and then there was something that happened a little later than that. It was something about, you know, it says love is patient. And she's like, hey, did you hear that? Because he likes everything to happen tick, 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 right on time, right? Anyway, fun stuff. But Jesus leaves if he's not wanted. That's this picture on my window right here is what that's about. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Jesus' perspective with us and his way with us. If anyone opens the door, I will come on in. But he doesn't push that door open, and he doesn't keep it open. It's for us. That's on us. So I think that's a telling thing. So he got into the boat and he left. Now the other side, there's a sequel to this that's not in this gospel. It's in the Gospel of Mark. Mark tells the same story, and then about 3 chapters later, it tells the story about how Jesus goes back over to the Gerasenes. And when he gets back there, they welcome him with open arms. They're delighted to see him. They're bringing out the sick on mats for him to heal them. It's an amazing twist. So you can see that gives us a little bit bigger picture of what's going on here. Jesus was doing stuff in his wisdom. He was sowing seeds. He was working the ground so that later on the fruit might be gathered. And the last part here is the man from whom the demons had gone begged to go with him. Here's another twist. So this guy who just till moments before being possessed with multitudes of demons, now he wants to be Jesus' disciple, get in the boat, sail back across over to Galilee and hang out with Jesus and the other guys. Natural response. He's happy, he's normal, he's free. However, there's a couple of problems with that. And they are, A, he's a Gentile, and B, he's a Gentile. Right? There's no way that would work. In their culture, there's no way he would be accepted if he went back with Jesus. Even the disciples couldn't handle that at this point. So Jesus kind of, he deflects it. He doesn't say, yo, you can't come back with us. You're not even a Jew. He doesn't do that, of course. But what he does say is super wise. He tells them, return home and tell how much God has done for you. So the man went, he says, that's a great idea. So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. And that could be your whole sermon right there. Because, you and I are like this guy. When you stop and think about it, and you rehearse perhaps your life, and think about how much God has done for you, how much Jesus has done for you, how much provision for your need, how much grace, how much forgiveness, how much love, how many miracles, how much healing for yourself and your family. And man, I could spend the day telling you stories. Our lives are so chock full of grace. What God has done for us, what Jesus has done for us. That, it's a really good thing to do. Go and tell what great things God has done for you, what Jesus has done for you. Don't hold back, folks. You and I, we really don't have to go and convince people into the kingdom of God. All we have to do is tell them our stories. And they can't argue with that anyway, right? Because it's real. It's true. It's happening. Okay, so anyway, this is a typical day in the life in the walk with Jesus, with being a disciple of Jesus. It's not boring. It's not predictable. No 2 days are the same. Go through the Gospels, no two are the same. Kind of like our lives today. Here is the difference, I think, between religion, what people call religion, and being a follower of Jesus. Because religion has all kinds of prescribed rituals and rules and ceremonies and studies and practices and those kinds of things. You follow the instructions. But Jesus is a person, and he wants to engage our lives. And he wants to be with us as we engage in other people's lives. That's amazing. It's a relationship thing, this walk with Jesus. It's quite an adventure, really. Are you ready for that adventure? Are you willing? Shall we pray?